Chapter 23. Gains and Losses. Did you seriously just hit a bracking civilian? Naomi yelled at Erds, their getaway driver. Moira stared dumbfounded at the windshield as the Sneppard rolled along the floor of the garage and flopped awkwardly to a stop about 6 feet away. I thought he'd get out of the way, like Zalota did, Erds said, raising his hands defensively towards the woman leaning into his space. He didn't even move. It's like he wanted to get hit or something. Not my fault. Hey, at least he's already in the hospital, Siev said, obviously trying to defuse. Someone here should be able to help him. Moira couldn't tear her eyes away from the man lying prone in a growing puddle of water. Erds turned on the windshield wipers, which only mostly helped deal with the water raining down from the ceiling, but the motion of the wipers was distant to Moira. The knockout gas had been one thing. They'd passed multiple unconscious guards and staff down here. Moira had stopped to check the first one, a female Sneppard, to make sure she was still breathing. She had been, but there'd been a faint trickle of blood from her nose. Moira hadn't checked the others after that. She hadn't wanted to know. But now they hit someone with a getaway vehicle? Even if it was an accident, surely that took things a little far, didn't it? She was already to the back doors of the ambulance when Zalota threw them wide open. He looked bad. The light in his eyes was dim, a cold, distant, seething thing. Water sloshed out of his boots as he stepped up into the back of the ambulance, and his clothes were plastered to his skin. He shook his head vigorously, spraying water across almost a dozen duffel bags of stolen goods, and half as many people, including Moira. Stop to take a shower? Siev asked. Zalota glared, an act that restored a bit of life to his eyes, but ignored the joke. Erds, get going. We've already been here long enough. His gruff voice still held its command, despite being empty of its usual bravado. Glancing back towards the windshield, Moira blurted, Shouldn't we check on that guy first? Everyone looked at her then, Zalota with particular annoyance, like he'd just spotted a mouse in the pantry. But she held his gaze anyway, and out of the corner of her eye, she caught Siev and Naomi both looking at him too. With a derisive snort, Zalota shook his head. He's a snop. Got what he deserved. The others looked away, and Zalota dropped his voice to such a whisper, Moira was pretty sure she was the only one who caught it. I should have killed him myself. Moira gulped, remembering how eagerly the others had bragged that Zalota could kill people for their cause. She remembered how casually he played with fire, and how much he liked to smother people with his confidence. The man she saw before her now was different. That distance in his eyes, his uneven breathing. For the first time, this man truly scared her, because in that moment, she finally believed that he was capable of murder. Several long seconds passed while Moira debated whether to run out the back right now and check the man herself. She already had some of what she came for, but it was small potatoes compared to what she could make off with if she stuck around at the end. Her debate timer ran out as Zalota pounded the side of the ambulance. Erds, I said get us moving! I meant right now! Naomi checked out the windows, then glanced around the back of the ambulance. Where's Rolf? Erds paused, glancing back at Zalota. Zalota shook his head. He fell behind. Vanina's cracks he fell behind! Naomi was in Zalota's face before Moira could blink, green tips of her mohawk folding back against her head. The woman had to crouch in a space where Moira's ears didn't even brush the ceiling. The world truly was unfair sometimes. Erds, Zalota growled. Yes, boss, Erds said, and Moira felt the ambulance starting to turn. Naomi's fingers curled into the sopping lapel of Zalota's fake scrubs, and she pressed her nose into his. What the brack happened to Rolf, Taz? This seemed to fully bring Zalota back to the present, and his teeth clacked together as he snapped at her. I said he fell behind. We'll have to get him later. We're here now, Dipdross. There's still time. Tell me where he is, and I'll drag his sorry rump back here myself. Zalota shook his head. Not happening, so drop it, Naomi. Moira backed up against the duffels, trying to put more space between her and these two giant brewing storms. Like a peal of thunder, Naomi slapped him. Zalota snarled at that, lips turning back like a feral deerhound about to strip meat from a bone. In the blink of an eye, his fist drove into Naomi's gut. The woman grunted, growled herself, and proceeded to knee Zalota in the crotch. Nolfin's shoulders rubbed on electrum light strips embedded overhead, as Siev and Jurgen both leapt to their feet in the cramped ambulance. They joined the fray, trying to pull their two snarling friends apart. Adrenaline coursed through Moira's veins, fear screaming into her ears. Despite its drowning voice, she had a thought. No one was watching her. Making a split decision, she unzipped the closest duffel bag. Boss! Erd's voice of concern was lost to the general din of the other four Nolfs shouting, snarling, snapping, and fighting in the back of the ambulance. Moira felt the ambulance stop turning, then reverse rotation. Knock it off! Siev shouted, trying to force himself between the two and earning several glancing blows to the shoulder and jaw for it. Moira's pockets were already full of small canisters Naomi had identified as shimmer. Apparently, they had some sort of fancy distillation something or other back at their little underground base. She'd mentioned an alembic, too, unless that was two different words for the same thing. Admittedly, science was not Moira's strong suit. Regardless, they used some fancy setup back at the base to combine shimmer and the expended blood and some of the pills they stole into a kind of gaseous soup which became fractal. Moira had filled her pockets with shimmer canisters until they were just shy of bulging, and as she looked down into the bounty of the unzipped duffel bag, she found she wanted more. So she carefully rolled up first one poofy orange pant leg, then the other, trying to turn her pants into a pair of enormous pockets. As the fighting continued, she stuffed fistfuls of canisters down her pant legs, quite pleased to see that their inherent poofiness hid any sort of suspicious bulging. Guys! Erd shouted. Zalota's snot is getting back up! That finally got everyone's attention. Moira's hand was buried in her own pant leg down past her knee, and she quickly removed it. She didn't have to worry. All eyes were watching out the windshield, where the Fyram headlights were casting a warm orange glow over a figure slowly getting back on his feet. Zalota roughly shoved off of Naomi, both of them sporting fresh bruises and superficially bleeding cuts. Persistent anima spawn, he muttered. He's kind of in the way, Erds noted. Yeah, I could see that, idiot, Zalota snapped. Maybe if you'd listened the first time, you wouldn't have to run him over now. Erds flinched, and Moira took the opportunity to stuff another heaping handful of canisters down her other pant leg. Go! Zalota was practically screaming it in the other man's face, which didn't seem to help his decision-making ability. Seed mother's sake, you're such a muler! Sliding partway into Erdz's lap, Zalota slammed a foot on the throttle, and the Fyram thrusters roared to life. Out the windshield, the snop drew near at an alarming rate, then disappeared a second before impact. Moira didn't hear or feel anything hit the ambulance, so he must have either leapt to the side or dropped straight back to the ground. Either way, they didn't seem to have hit him. To her great relief, Zalota didn't seem inclined to turn back around and make sure. Instead, he pushed off the other man's lap before collapsing into the passenger seat beside him. See how easy that was? He growled. The tension in the ambulance was as thick as the necral haze had been. Naomi still glared daggers at the back of Zalota's head, though Moira could see a bit of teary redness to her eyes. Siev was trying to calm her down, but it was unclear if it was helping. Moira risked 2 more handfuls before quietly zipping the duffel closed. Jurgen glanced at her as her hand left the zipper, so she patted the bag and gave him what she hoped was a convincing smile. He studied her face for a few moments, then turned towards the front to talk with Erds and Zalota. Moira slumped to a seated position beside the duffels. It was going to be a long drive back. Moira had never been so relieved to see a rusted, dirty door. The drive had been long, but she'd underestimated the walk that followed. Having stashed the ambulance in an abandoned garage in District 9, they spent the next hour hauling their stolen goods back on foot. They used the underground catwalks and tunnels, so they went almost entirely unnoticed. That hadn't kept Moira from seeing Snops waiting to spring from every passing shadow, or worse, her mother. But they'd made it without incident, and now Zalota unlocked the door to their hideout and threw it open. One by one, they stepped inside and dropped their bags against the wall. With one of their members in custody, they'd had extra bags to carry. The Nolfs had traded off amongst themselves as they went, leaving Moira to haul around her single duffel bag of shimmer. She had rattled almost as much as the bag, but no one seemed to notice. The bag slipped from her stiff fingers as she hauled it to the corner with the others. Her shoulders were both aching. She tried swapping shoulders for most of the trip, but settled on carrying the straps with both hands for the final stretch of the journey. Nothing in her body was happy with having gone through that much physical exertion. Erds collapsed face first into the couch. Jurgen didn't even make it that far, slumping against the wall and sliding down until he was seated on the floor. Naomi left the room as soon as her packs were unloaded. She'd hardly said a word since they ditched the ambulance. Siev shared a look with Zalota, who just rolled his eyes. Grimacing, Siev took off after Naomi. With a snort and a shake of his head, Zalota headed for the kitchen. Moira lifted her arms over her head, stretching all of her too short frame that had been compressed by carrying such a large bag. Rolling her arms and wrists helped to restore some of the circulation. She was still exhausted. Her ears perked at a fresh sound from the couch. Erds was actually snoring. It hadn't even been a full minute since he'd collapsed. Somehow, that seemed to be one of the most impressive feats she'd seen all day. Moira's board called to her from where she'd left it the next corner over. Almost. Not yet, but very soon, she thought. Every moment she stuck around was a risk. Her pockets were lined with handfuls of shimmer canisters, and she felt the cold touch of metal reaching up to just below her kneecap. She hadn't dared to stuff her pants any higher than that, as it would have made walking a nightmare. She should go now. It was the safest thing to do. But leaving without telling anyone would be suspicious, and she might need to get more from them in the future. Plus, these people were cool. Dangerous, but cool. They hurt people today, Moira. Are you really okay with that? She grimaced at her own question. There were lots of excuses she could make. By using knockout gas, they hadn't had to fight anyone while stealing, so that had to lower the risk of killing anyone. But the gas itself had been unpleasant to experience, even with the gas masks and use of fractal to shoo the gas away. What was it Siev had told Zalota? You'll get the mixtures right one day. He'd been referring to Fyram at the time, but making a magic crystal was roughly the same process regardless of the crystal type. The only difference was in the core ingredients used and the ratios involved. Maybe Zalota wasn't as resourceful as he presented himself to be. The idea held instant appeal to Moira, so she allowed herself to continue to follow it. She could picture him combining something in a crystal mold. She wasn't sure what Fyram was made from. Naira hadn't taught her that one yet, probably because fire is dangerous, Moira, and you could hurt yourself, and blah, blah, blah. Moira knew fire was dangerous. It didn't take an idiot to figure that out. But she'd never once been burned, and she didn't intend to start. So if Zalota was experimenting with amounts and ratios while prepping crystals, what if he'd done the same with the necrum they'd used to gas the hospital? She saw the security guard in a heap on the floor again, blood trickling from her nose. Maybe she just hit it on the way down. She was face up, Moira, don't be stupid. It had to be an effect of the gas. And then they'd hit someone with the getaway vehicle. Almost twice! A snop, no less. After how much the snops had held out on her about her mother, she didn't exactly hold them in high regard, but neither did she bear them any true ill will. They were presumptuous, annoying idiots, but they were a necessary part of Cyphus. At the end of the day, they were people too. There had been hatred in Zelota's eyes when they'd picked him up. I should have killed him myself, he'd whispered. Were these people really that cool? Obviously, they were, but could Moira run someone over if she was told to? Worse, they seemed pretty easy to set off. A single slap had erupted into a playground beatdown between Naomi and Zelota. What if that had been turned on her? Did she really think she could go toe-to-toe with giants? If I could use magic like they can, like Naira can, then I could take any of them. Again, her board called to her. She'd been here too long. She should take what she could get and leave. But something compelled her to stay. Curiosity killed the snapbird, Moira, she warned herself. Even so, she found herself wandering into the kitchen. Zelota was slumped back in a chair at the tiny table in here. His fingers clasped a bottle of some dark brown drink that was already half gone. His eyes were distant, and he just stared at the wall across from him, not even bothering to acknowledge her entrance. With a quiet harumph at being willfully ignored, Moira strode over to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of something blue with a goofy-looking dinosaur mascot on the label. Walking over to the table, she asked, "Can I join you for a sec?" Salota's weariness oozed out of him in a sigh that sounded like someone had punched a hole in an Aurum mattress. Not in the mood, squeakers. His eyes focused a bit, but not on her. Squeakers? Moira felt the indignation boiling in her cheeks. Not trusting herself to say anything nice, she turned her attention to the cold bottle in her hands. A discreet check of the cap proved that it wasn't a twist-off. That was probably for the best. Her fingers were still sore from carrying that stupid bag around. How had Siev done this? He just smacked the bottle cap against the lip of the table, right? She could do that. Easy. Her first attempt was so light, the table barely made a sound when it connected. No, he had done it fast. One smooth motion. So she went fast. Her second attempt didn't even touch the table. Just whiffed through empty air. That drew Zelota's eye, and she tried to keep her embarrassment from adding to the warmth of her cheeks. She tried a third time, clinking the bottle as she slammed its neck against the table. Start with it touching the table, Zelota muttered, before taking a swig from his own drink. Oh, right. That was how Siev had done it. Moira caught the bottle cap on the lip of the table, then brought her palm down to strike it. Not wanting to embarrass herself any further, she put quite a bit of force behind it. Unfortunately, the cap stayed on, and she just bruised her hand as she hit both cap and table with a loud smack. Shaking her hand, she readied to go again. Zelota leaned over, stretching out a charcoal hand. Here, Squeakers. My name's not Squeakers! Moira practically shouted, smacking the cap again before he could grab the bottle. The cap came off, and she nearly forgot to keep hold of the bottle. Playing it off, she hoped her smugness showed on her face as she took a sip. It was fruity and very sweet. Much better than the last drink she'd had here. No, he mused, settling back in his chair. Your name is Moira. Something about the way he said it, probably the extra emphasis on her name, made her narrow her eyes at him. She waited for a moment, but he said nothing else as he took another swig. And yours is Zelota, she said, and sometimes Taz. To you, it's Zelota. Only friends get to call me Taz. Moira's hand still stung from smacking the table, and while her general tiredness was still present, the sugar in her drink was temporarily scaring the sleepies away. Sleepies? She thought. What, am I 7 now? Her eyes rolled up in her skull in self-annoyance. With a shake of her head, she pushed the thought aside. The drink was giving her a bit of extra energy, so she wanted to do this while she felt emboldened. Can I ask you some questions? Zelota let out another sigh, looking towards the doorway of the kitchen as if considering the merits of just leaving. Then he settled back into his drink.
Sure.
Then you have to answer some of mine. Okay, that made sense. That's fair, she said, sliding into the chair beside him. The thing was cheap enough it probably left splinters in her pants. Worse, it left her toes a few inches too high to touch the floor, something she solved by tucking her legs up into a little butterfly. She heard the faintest sound of some of the shimmer canisters clinking together, and tried to muffle it by slamming her drink on the table. Zalota looked at her drink with a raised eyebrow, then rolled his eyes, took a sip, and went back to staring at the wall. I've heard people talking at school. Seen posters taped up in bus stops and graffiti on alley walls. This is really all Evo is? A small group of friends that invite people off the streets to get high for a night while bragging about how you're going to make a difference in the world? Zalota snorted. If that's all you see, then sure. That's not an answer. What do you actually do? What needs to be done, Zalota said with a shrug. Again, not an answer. Zalota let out a long-suffering exhale, like he was talking with a toddler. We do rallies and stuff sometimes. Speak out against discrimination, oppression, the like. How people like you and your mother keep people like me on the streets. Moira stiffened. My mother? What's she got to do with anything? Zalota snorted a mirthless laugh. Not stupid, Pipsqueak. I know you're Dolahan's kid. Siev said your driver, your Nolfin driver, identified you before taking you home last time. Besides, you came in here with more cash than most Nolfs make in a year. Looked like the bag was going to tip you right over. If you know who my mother is, you should be thanking me. My mother's done more to get Nolfs off the street than anyone in Cyphus. She employs hundreds of Nolfs in her factories and... to do all the dross work no one else wants to do, Zalota interrupted. Yeah, she's a real hero. Fits in well with what's left of the 13. Moira felt suddenly conflicted. She felt like she should defend her mother, but the sentiment surprised her. Why should she waste time defending the character of a woman who ignored her all week long, except for maybe an hour every other storm day when she didn't want to leave the house? Her mother wanted her fed, quiet, safe, and complacent. And maybe other people would kill to be in Moira's position. Maybe some hungry Nolfs on the streets of District 11 would gladly trade their lives for hers. She couldn't deny that it was a cushy gig, but it was a lonely one. And the more Moira thought about it, the more she was sure she would rather be hungry and cold than lonely. With a swift shake of her head, she took a new approach. You lied. You told everyone at your recruitment night that you killed my mother. Why? Cocking an eyebrow, his notched ear twitched as he regarded her. Now you're putting words in my mouth. I just said she was dead and that Cyphus was better for it. What's it matter anyway? That why you came here? To kill me and avenge your dead mother? She's not... Moira bit off her response. No one was supposed to know that her mother was alive. Zalota gave a little snort, the corner of his mouth creeping up into a knowing grin. That's interesting, he said, as he took a fresh sip. Moira felt her nose wrinkling, her whiskers twitching as the tip of her tail pendulumed behind her chair. Her mother didn't let things slip. She always worked conversations from a position of power, squeezing people into giving her the answer she needed. Somehow, Moira had to channel that side of herself. Well, your story didn't seem to convince anyone to stick around once the fractal wore off. Yeah, Zalota said, his gaze growing distant again as his mouth dipped into a frown. They'll show up again when we schedule a rally. They'll tell their friends, so should be a good turnout. But all they care about is forgetting life for a while. Hate to break it to you, squeakers, but life in Cyphus sucks dross. Not that I expect you to know anything about that. Oh, because my life is so perfect and wonderful? The question snapped out of her like a deerhound running for freedom when the front door opened. Instead of her holding the position of power, He'd pushed her buttons and made her give up ground. Wow, she was really bad at this. Yeah, it is, Zalota said. And you should go back to it and leave us, the Fanina, alone. That was her out, she realized with startling clarity. He wanted her to leave. She should take the opportunity and get out while she could. Her feet were losing circulation, but she refused to move her legs yet, lest it rattle all the shimmer hiding there. Besides, he continued, you don't really have what it takes. Moira froze. Of all the things he could have said, she doubted anything could have glued her rump to that seat any better. Excuse me? She blurted. You're just some kid who thought it'd be fun to try playing with the big kids for once. But you saw what we did today. The fractal we use has to come from somewhere, and no one down here can afford to buy it. Besides, if we bought the stuff on the streets, it's cut with so much dross we'd be dead or drooling after 2 puffs. It's way safer to brew our own. But the quantities we need, we gotta play risky for those, and sometimes... His voice grew dark. Sometimes the risk bites you, and they take the people you love. This brought 2 questions to Moira's mind, but she focused on one at a time. How much fractal do you need? Zalota actually chuckled at that. Enough to put a sizable dent in your inheritance if you tried to buy the stuff. His eyes flashed wider for a split second. Then he grinned and finished off what was in his bottle. For a future rally? Moira asked tentatively. With a smirk, Zalota shrugged. Yeah, something like that. And what's going to happen to your friend, Rolf? The mirth faded immediately, his face falling back to a resigned frown. Prison, probably. They'll put him on bail we can't afford, and we'll have to go break his sorry rump out of jail, or Naomi will kill us. Or she'll go try it herself, get caught, and get thrown in prison with him. Fanina. Maybe that's the happier ending to it all. Now it was Moira's turn to frown. So, what? You're just okay with losing a friend? Giving up on him like that? Zalota gave a grunt of annoyance. Listen, squeakers, losing people is part of life, especially once snops get involved, alright? I know that's not something you've ever had to deal with, but out here in the swampy dross of the poorer districts, Nolfs end up on the street, and the slammer, we're 6 feet under. It's only a matter of time. That's the reality you will never know. Moira's whiskers were twitching furiously, her tail zipping back and forth like the drum line of a Midnight Thunder song. She wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. After all, he was right. For all her pretending, for all that she wanted to feel like she had things so bad, she didn't. That set some part of her aflame. She wanted to help. But how could she? She was just one girl. One tiny little girl in a world of giants run by a system that had been broken since its inception. She didn't see people differently. Nolf or Snepper didn't matter. A person was a person. Why couldn't other people see the world that way? She wasn't stupid. There were undeniable differences between Nolfs and Sneppards. But they were both people, and people should be treated like people. Problem was, no one really wanted to do that. Why? Because they'd been conditioned to just accept reality. She'd seen it in her mother. She'd seen it in Sergei, in Naira, and now in Zalota, the very man who was willing to do stupid and violent things just to try to stand out in the world. It seemed as effective a thing in Moira's mind as a fly trying to strangle a deerhound. It was absurd to continue. The game was rigged from top to bottom, and everyone in Cyphus knew it. Most pretended they didn't, ignoring it and just living their carefree lives, never dreaming that they were perpetuating the problem. She blinked. Her drink remained almost entirely untouched in her hand. Wow. He really had managed to push one of her buttons. Her nose wrinkled in a grimace as she muttered. Yeah, we're not the same. I'm a Sneppard, you're a Nolf. I'm a bright-eyed rich kid, and you're a sourpuss. But people are still people. Doesn't matter if they're brown, black and ginormous, or white, gray, and entitled. I'm not any better than you just because of what you were born as, and you're not any better than me just because you're older and taller. She trailed off, expecting an argument to follow. It didn't. When she glanced at him, she was surprised to find him staring at her. Creepy. Though he looked more searching than smitten, so that was at least a good sign. Instead, he stared past her gaze for a few long moments. The tingle in her feet was becoming more noticeable, and she readjusted as quietly as she could. Finally, he spoke in a quiet voice that wasn't directed at her. My brother used to talk like that. Used to? She prompted. Zelota's face contorted in a swirl of grief, anger, and frustration, and though it wasn't directed at her, Moira still flinched. If he noticed, he didn't comment. He simply shook his head, turning his gaze back to the ugly, peeling wall with a scoff. Most people don't think like that. People are people is a nice sentiment, but it doesn't hold water around here. If people actually thought of Nolfs and Sneps as equals, Vanina'd still be around. It's not. Sneps took it out because they hate us. So why shouldn't we hate you? He looked to her as he asked this, raising an eyebrow and waiting for his response. Well, he was a fanatic, so of course he was a conspiracy theorist. Everyone learned about Vanina in third grade history. It was as important an event as the crash or the war for Gleaming Brook. Vanina had been a Nolfin bulb. No, a seed. Nolfs used the word seed for the six domed cities. And 200 years ago, the Nolfin home of Vanina had been compromised. Tens of millions dead, and maybe 50,000 survivors left to brave Phanatom's wild jungles. Most of them wound up as refugees on Siphus's doorstep. The ones who didn't? Well, there was a reason they called it going native. There's no proof that Sneppards had anything to do with it, Moira said. It was a bad combination of poor structural engineering and unsafe resource gathering practices that attracted territorial megafauna. Moira was impressed that the words still came so easily. She'd written that essay 7 years ago. And all the other bulbs learned from it and made improvements so it would never happen again. He snorted. So it's okay for us to be the guinea pig for everyone else? Were you born there? His look of indignation narrowed into a glare. No, he finally admitted. I was born here. Doesn't negate my heritage, and it certainly doesn't forgive the sins of your fathers. Moira sighed. He was probably right. But he was also an egotistical prick who didn't need to know that she agreed. So you're going to make it worse by compounding sins in the present? He laughed at that. Not just a simple chuckle or a friendly gaffe, but the incredulous laugh of a kit who'd just been told that rain never came on Sundays. Pot meet kettle, he said, in between breaths. Or did you forget that your mother's one of the 13? You want to talk about compounding sins? At least she's trying to bring people together, not drive the wedge further, Moira shot back. Getting people's attention only matters if you do the right thing once you have it. Zelota smirked and shook his head. Seed, Mother. Really do sound like Ren. Ren? Why did that sound so familiar? Gonna drink that, or just gonna let it continue to pollute the room with the smell of cotton candy and too much artificial sweetener? He nodded at the blue drink in her hand, liquid still well up into the neck. Frowning, Moira took a sniff, but she couldn't smell anything unless she brought the bottle right under her nose. You can smell that? Yeah, and it's already giving me a sympathy headache. You two are a good match for each other. The deerhound almost slipped out the front gate again, but it stopped dead in its tracks when she caught his smirk. He wanted to goad her. Well, she wasn't going to let him have the satisfaction. Instead, she opted to spray her inner deerhound in the face by taking a gulp of her soda. Pretty sure it's my turn to ask questions, Squeakers. The deerhound continued to struggle, despite being waterboarded with liquid cotton candy. This guy was the worst. Every word out of his mouth riled her up. No, she wouldn't let him win. Moira forced a swallow and a few breaths before taking her own sweet time to respond. Ask me anything, your dampness. He snorted, glancing down at his mostly dry pants and the matted fur on his arms. Really? That's the best you could come up with? Seed Mother, you really are a sheltered kid. The deerhound's snarls turned into a gargle in Moira's mind as she forced herself to take another drink. She couldn't think of a good comeback, so she didn't bother. When the silence went on too long, he'd ask his question. Speaking of too long, her feet had fully lost circulation at this point. Ready or not, she had to put her legs down now. She felt dozens of shimmer canisters shift as she moved her legs. Not in the tactile way she should, but in that awful pressure-only way, like when a dentist went for a tooth after numbing your mouth. Something else was wrong with the movement. It was happening too far down her leg. Then she heard it. A soft, metallic plink as something hit the floor. Panic flooded her. Several responses came to mind at the same time, and she tried them all. Throwing her whole body into the motion, she scooted her chair a bit closer to the table, earning a gratifying, prolonged squeak. Then she smacked her bottle onto the table far too loud and cleared her throat. Your questions, Soggy Fur. He seemed too stunned to respond, and not in a good way. Surely he'd heard that shimmer canister drop. Soggy Fur was absolutely the lamest insult she could have come up with. But panic was high, adrenaline was surging, and she just used the first thing that came to mind. Any second he was going to look down, see the shimmer canister rolling up against her chair leg, finally spot the bulging in her jacket and pants, and kill her for stealing. She'd seen how quickly Zalota and Naomi had turned on each other, snarling and snapping and drawing blood. As volatile as he was, he'd probably ram Moira's own bottle of soda down her throat and choke her with it. At least her last moments would taste like cotton candy. And blood, probably. Seconds passed before he shook his head. You're so bad at this, Squeakers. You just have zero friends, so you've never learned how to tease people or make good nicknames. With all the pins and needles shooting up her leg as circulation returned, scooting forward in her chair was agony. Her toes stretched as she reached for the floor. Then, finding it, she slowly started feeling around for the canister that had dropped. Multitasking, she gave him a grimace. That's a stupid question, and I'm not answering it. Ask something else. He gave a self-satisfied snort, and if she wasn't afraid of physical retaliation, she might have smacked him for it. Fine. Why do you want fractal? She stopped moving. That question had to be motivated by her currently being laden with stolen shimmer. He was asking because he knew, right? No, that didn't seem to be the case. He'd be gloating if it was. Weighing the pros and cons between lying and telling the truth, Moira compromised with vagueness. For the experience. Raising an eyebrow, Zalota asked, If you're looking for a rush, there's less dangerous options. Not ones that let me touch magic. Something clicked in his eyes, and his mouth widened into a knowing smile. Suddenly extra nervous, Moira forced herself to take another drink. Her bottle was half empty now. When it was finished, she'd leave the room and this place. It didn't feel safe to stay much longer. Taking a chance that he was sufficiently distracted, she started feeling around with her toes again, probing for that stray canister. Having shopped around, I can tell you that magic is in fact the best option when you want to rush, Zalota agreed. There was sincerity in his expression, but it was overshadowed by confidence, something far more dangerous, almost primal. Moira felt the fur standing up on the back of her neck. Then her toe brushed against something small and metal that rolled when she touched it. She froze, but Zalota's eyes didn't look down, nor did his ears twitch. His nose was working, but Moira was pretty sure he couldn't smell the contents of a sealed container. So who's teaching you magic? He asked. Taking another sip, her toes curled around the stray canister. She felt the motion shift more shimmer around in her pant leg, and opted to stay very still for now. I'm self-taught, she said. It was kind of true. Zalota raised an eyebrow. So you're not a university student or anything? Moira frowned. Not quite old enough or motivated enough for that, I'm afraid. Just, learning on my own. She forced a smile and another drink. The bottle was nearly empty, then she would bolt. I find that hard to believe. I find it hard to care what you do or do not believe, she snapped back. The deerhound was escaping the yard a lot today, though it didn't seem to bother him like she feared it would. Even so, it was time. She'd pressed her luck enough. As she brought the bottle to her lips to finish it, Zalota clapped a large hand down on her arm. She could feel his bristly charcoal fur poking out around the rough and calloused pads of his hands. The unexpected contact made her choke on her drink, and she had to cough pretty hard to clear her lungs. What are you? She started. Zalota cut her off. Next question, squeakers. Why do you smell like my mother? What kind of bracking question is that? His mother? Who was he even talking about? Outside of Naomi, Moira didn't know any other female gnolls. Oh. No? She did know one more. Her gaze settled on his notched ear, something that should have clicked long ago. It matched what she'd seen in the photograph. He had a brother who'd been killed by a snop. The charcoal hands and the dark fur patterns that swirled under his eyes. Seed mother. Up close, he really had a lot of his mother's features. You're alive? She breathed. Tazel's hand was firm on her wrist, pinning it to the table as he leaned into it. Then he was sniffing her shoulder, his nose tickling her fur in a distinctly unpleasant way. Panic surged through her, and in that moment all she wanted was for him to get out of her space. So she brought the bottle around and smashed it against the side of his head. Or rather, she tried. She hit him, but the bottle didn't shatter. It just dully thunked against his skull. He blinked a bit in surprise. Moira swung again, but he caught her arm with his free hand. That hurt, squeakers, he growled. There was fire returning to his eyes. Tired as he was, it was there, and Moira had just tossed entire handfuls of firearm pellets into the blaze. Let go of me, she yelled, trying to pull free of his grip. But he was strong, much bigger and stronger than her. Answer me, he growled again, bringing his nose inches from her own. I can smell her on you. Where's my mother? She's safe. She's fine, Moira snapped, getting to her feet. Shimmer canister still curled into her toes. She continued her attempts to pull free, throwing her weight into it now. Now let go! Suit yourself. With a smirk, Tazel released his grip. Losing her balance, Moira crashed to the ground. Her hip hit first, then her shoulder before her head smacked backwards to join the fun. The pain that followed made it hard to think, but her fight or flight response was still screaming at her. What is this? Tazel asked. It hurt to open her eyes, but survival demanded it. Blinking rapidly to clear the blurring tears, she saw Tazel take form. He was crouching near her, and clutched between his thumb and finger was the canister of shimmer. Moira pulled herself backwards, favoring the hip that wasn't currently throbbing. He watched her with a frown, scrutinizing her more closely now. Then his hand shot out towards her leg. His dull claws hooked the hem of her pant leg, untucking it as she yanked her leg away. Dozens upon dozens of shimmer canisters spilled onto the floor. They rolled in all directions, several coming to rest against his boot, where his heart sank. Tazel stared at the canisters, his face twitching for a few moments before going very still and very cold. You know, I'd be lying if I said I was surprised. With a scoff, he shook his head. A smile came to his face, but any hint of friendliness was gone. I knew it. I knew you couldn't really be like Ren. He was too unique. Too good of a person. You're nothing like him. He would never use his ideals to steal and stab his friends in the back. Empty your pockets and get out. No. Moira had risked too much. To go through all this and walk away with nothing? No, no way that was happening. Her gaze shot to the kitchen door. It was still open. No one had responded to the noise, and her board was out there. She heard a familiar, faint hissing sound that was muffled almost as soon as it began. Glancing back, she saw the shimmer canister between his teeth and the faint glow entering his eyes. Bad, bad, this was bad. Without registering any conscious thought, Moira lunged for the pile of loose canisters. She came away clutching 4 and brought them to her teeth. Seed mother, I hate junkies, Tazale muttered. Admittedly, hunched over a pile of shimmer like this, and hurting her teeth from missing the tip, Moira knew what her actions made her look like. Well past caring about her appearance, she punctured all 4 canisters and inhaled deeply. Clarity washed through her, as did an acute awareness of her new bruises. The worst was in her hip, but it was her trailing leg on her hoverboard anyway. And the music. She heard the Fyrom light over the sink like giggling children on a playset. Heard the low, vibrating hum of the electrum powering the refrigerator, like someone trying to talk while holding onto an active jackhammer. She heard the staccato notes of anger, growing in volume just in Tazale's breathing. She heard the now familiar song of her own breathing, still with the 4-piece cadence that capped off each individual breath. But there was an added melody now. Not quite discordant, but urgent and attention-grabbing. Was that because of her fresh injuries? Even taking 4 doses at once, it wasn't quite as potent an experience as Prism. On the plus side, it tasted cleaner than Fractal and left her head without any sort of buzz. Fine, Tazale said, his voice carrying percussive elements that were nearly identical to Naira's. You want to experience magic so badly? Let's find out together what I do with lying, thieving, selfish mulers who think I'm too stupid to catch on. His hand sank into the pocket he had left. Unlike underneath the hospital, there was no necromuddiness dulling her hearing, so her ears caught a fresh set of Fyrom children coming out to play, much closer than the light over the sink. Time to go. Flinging the empty canisters in her hand at Tazale, Moira scrambled to her feet and dashed for the door. Tazale's hand came up to shield his face, but not quite in time, and a few of the empty canisters bounced off his nose. An orb of pure flame crashed into the door behind her, hundreds of Fyrom voices laughing with glee at this new game they were playing, before the fire died and the voices were snuffed out. Jurgen cracked an eye open from his spot against the wall as Moira burst into the main room. Without giving him a second glance, she ran straight for her hoverboard. She reached it as Tazale entered the room. Stop her, he barked. She's a bracking thief! Tucking her hoverboard under her arm, Moira ran for the exit. She heard the next fireball as it was formed. Turning to look at it, she saw it hurtling straight for her face. Tazale had one fanina of a pitching arm. With no time to duck, and unsure what else to do, Moira listened. She heard the tone shift in her panicked gasp. She heard the tremulous voice in the choir singing about the ache in her hip as she ran. She heard claws clicking on the floor as Jurgen ran towards her. And she heard the cacophony of excited laughter as the Fyrom longed to play Red Rover with her face. The Fyrom didn't care who played with it. It wasn't alive to care. It simply enjoyed the new experience and direction it had been given, and would spend the rest of its short life in that enjoyment. So maybe... Moira caught a repeated melody that she was beginning to associate with Fyrom. She hummed along, and the approaching orb flashed briefly. Then she sang a single word in harmony with that song. Up! The orb flared as its momentum shifted. It curved, arcing in front of her face so close it singed a few whiskers before slamming into the ceiling. There, it dispersed. In the doorway of the kitchen, Tazale stood with arms still outstretched from his throw. His smug, confident look melted into shock, and his jaw dropped. Moira felt the thrill of satisfaction that always came with showing up idiots. It had been a terrifyingly close call, and she still couldn't believe it had worked. But it had, so Tazale could suck dross. A hand clamped on her shoulder a moment later. Jurgen. She felt his fingers pinch her shoulder as he dug into her jacket. He only looked at her for a second before turning back to Tazale. Too close, don't you think, Zell? She could hear the tremors at the beginning and end of Jurgen's voice, like individual choir members who accidentally voice cracked while singing and hoped the rest of the choir hit it. He was afraid of Tazeal's actions. To her surprise, he was also afraid of her reaction. So while he was gripping her, he still kept her at arm's length. Most importantly, she still had shimmer in her system. Bracing the hoverboard against her knee, she cranked the feed, loading the board with fresh, uncrushed aurum pellets from the reservoir. As she let go, the spring forced the feed lever back, crushing the pellets and activating the aurum repulsors on the underside of the board. Recovering from his stupor, Tazeal lifted a finger and shouted, "Hey, watch it!" Too late. Moira threw her body weight against the board, forcing it up against Jurgen's body. Then she braced her feet as she audibly matched the aurum hum and rallied them. The repulsors flared, but Jurgen wasn't flung backwards as she'd hoped. Instead, physics had the last laugh, and Moira herself was sent hurtling backwards. She saw with some satisfaction that Jurgen lost his balance and toppled over, so that was at least something. The satisfaction lasted only a few seconds before she slammed into the wall beside the exit. The only downside to shimmer, or prism, or fractal was the enhanced sensitivity to pain. So while it stimulated more useful senses like sight and hearing, it also enhanced things like pain and taste in equal measure. She knew this because she could taste and feel where she'd bitten her tongue as part of the impact. "What's going on?" a new voice called from surprisingly close. The coy but punchy rhythm told her it was Siev seconds before he reached her. "You okay, Moira?" "She's a thief, Siev," Tazeal called. He hadn't moved any closer yet, but he was actively fishing in his pocket, presumably for another crystal. "And an aurum user," Jurgen warned as he got back on his feet. Erds had woken up from his nap on the couch and offered a hand to Jurgen. Even Naomi was peeking into the room from the hall. "Well, yeah, Toz. She helped us today, so she's a thief like the rest of us." Siev offered Moira a hand, but she batted it away, standing up on her own. "No." Tazeal's teeth were actually grinding together, and shimmer helped Moira hear it from across the room. "She stole from us. Stuffed her pants full of shimmer. Probably her sleeves and pockets, too." Moira frowned. Why hadn't she thought to use her sleeves? It was a great idea. It's too late now. Siev looked back at her. "That true?" There was something about his voice. She could hear the notes in it doubting the story. Doubting her, but wanting to believe. And his eyes, they have to look so puppy-like. If it had been Tazeal asking, she could have lied to his face. Maybe not well, but easily. Tazeal was a jerk and a bully. Siev? Siev was friendly, goofy, and looked out for people. But she could see by his eyes that the hurt had probably already been done. No point in making it worse. "Sorry," she said, then glanced at the exit. He followed her gaze, then sighed. "It's okay. I get it." Then he gestured with his head for the door. "Go on." "Go on?" Tazeal hissed. "She's a kid, Taz. She's not going to cause us any problems." Ever since meeting her, Siev had used her name. But now, she was reduced to just a kit? That stung worse than pips, squeakers, or anything else. "Siev, I didn't take anything else. I just need some shimmer for..." He cut her off with an upraised hand. With a small shake of his head, he said, "I don't need to know. Thank you for your help today, but I think it's best for everyone if you go now." "She's not walking out of here with our stuff," Tazeal roared, fingers shaking at an angry point as he took several steps forward. "Vanina's cracks. Just drop it, Taz. She can't carry much anyway. We won't even notice what's missing. The world needs less dead kits, not more." Moira wanted to be angry. No one in the room was more than 6 years her senior, so they were all still basically kids, and she couldn't help her size. Despite her indignation, Siev's words were having an effect on Tazeal. She could hear it in his breathing. Notes of nervousness from the other Nolfs echoed through the air, but they were hard to catch over the Aurum reaction from her board, unless she really focused on them. Siev walked to the door then, opening it and turning it to her. I suggest you leave, Moira. It was a good suggestion. It's what she wanted to do. But to leave like this? Having been caught and exposed in front of all of them? What else could she do? She didn't want to give up the shimmer, and Siev wasn't asking for it. The safest thing was to take the door that had been opened. Tucking her board under her arm, Moira headed for the door. She watched Tazael for most of it. He was still grinding his teeth. The glow was mostly gone from his eyes, his single dose of shimmer well depleted by just 2 firearm castings. She'd need to learn to be efficient with what she had if she wanted this stock of shimmer to last, especially since it didn't seem like she'd be able to get more this way ever again. She stopped in the threshold of the large metal door. I assume I shouldn't come back later? Probably for the best, Siev said. With a smirk and a chuckle, he added, Sorry, Kit. We're too cool for you. Then he closed the door behind her. She watched as the bar rotated down into place, latching the door shut. She could hear them on the other side, arguing because of her. She thought about opening the door herself and going back inside, but Siev's words rang in her ears. Sorry, Kit. We're too cool for you. The fun and cheerful notes of his song couldn't take the bite out of his words. He'd seemed nice and friendly and fun, but that had 180'd quickly when he'd found out that she'd stolen Shimmer. Then he treated her the same way all his friends did. Yeah, it was stupid to think she ever could have fit in with these guys. Tears welled up then, and she rubbed furiously at them with the poofy sleeve of her favorite jacket. Fingers trembling, she retrieved her cassette player, donned her headphones, and pressed play. Even the sounds of midnight thunder didn't help as much as they usually did. Given time, might. Making sure she wasn't going to spill any more shimmer from loose clothing or pockets, Moira hopped on her hoverboard and zipped along the catwalk. End of Part 3. Part 4, Necrum. Chapter 24, Mapping Out Intersections. 30 years ago. Silatra missed the Fyram streetlight by inches as she drifted the Parkway corner. She'd been practicing that turn for months, but she had a new bike tonight and almost overcompensated. That was the closest she'd ever come to wiping out on the Parkway stretch of the race. Parkway was notorious. It crossed Alderson Avenue at an angle that was almost parallel. That meant you had to nearly 180 just to make the turn. There was a reason ordinary traffic through this turn was limited to 15 miles per hour. It was a sharp enough turn that even the other racers cut their throttle well before reaching it. Not Silatra. If she'd clipped the lamppost with her bike, the momentum would have sent her hurtling into oncoming traffic or the buildings across the street. But Silatra wasn't just any driver. Her risk paid off, and she went instantly from 6th place to 3rd. She was on Dravota's tail. The obnoxiously yellow hoverbike he favored was only a few car lengths ahead of her now. Far in the distance, she caught glimpses of a purple hoverbike as it weaved through Parkway traffic. Her true target, Orana. Orana was undefeated on this circuit and had been for 2 years. Silatra had won the District 7 and District 10 circuits this year, but that didn't mean much. District 3 was the important one. District 3 was where Orana raced. She was a living legend. Today was the day Silatra was going to beat her. Silatra leaned low over the Futsumata X18 she'd swiped from a dealership parking lot in District 2. It was a white, boxy thing that she'd hastily painted over with red until 2 narrow strips of white remained like racing stripes. It was a longer model with less height than previous ones. The maneuvering thrusters on the X18 were lower than most, actually resting under the legs to allow for obtuse rotations. That also meant the rider had to practically lay on their stomach to ride the hoverbike. But that just made it even more fun. If her feet had to come down to the ground at all, she'd probably burn her leg on a thruster. If she crashed, there was no way she was staying on the bike. But those were only problems if she crashed or had to slow down unexpectedly. She didn't plan to do either. Besides, she had another edge: Alchemancy. Granted, you didn't make it into the finals of the District 3 circuit without having either a well-tuned machine or the alchemantic knack for tuning or flaring as you drove. In the distance, a string of lights blared red as traffic came to a stop. One car nearly ran Orana's hoverbike off the road. Drivers never check for hoverbikes, especially this late at night. The primary thruster on the back of Orana's hoverbike shifted from orange flames to blue, and she avoided the car by zooming around it. That wasn't going to help with the traffic that was stopping, though. Still, Orana kept flaring her firearm. She clearly didn't intend to slow down. Salatra watched in awe as seconds before Orana reached the car, her hoverbike suddenly leapt into the air as if it had legs to jump. That would be Electrum to amp her repulsors, and probably Aurum to assist her glide. Orana's purple hoverbike soared over the traffic, passing car after car. Reaching into a zippered pouch at her hip, Salatra grabbed a prism canister. After refreshing the prism in her system, she put the depleted canister back in a separate pouch on her opposite hip. Prism was expensive, but Hendry gave you credit if you recycled the canisters. The lights around her grew richer in both intensity and contrast. She felt the wind tugging at individual strands of fur not covered by her zippered tracksuit or visored helmet. Her ears folded back further, trying to ignore the constant roar of the rushing wind. Beneath her, she felt not just the frame of the X-18, but also the reactions powering it. She'd taken the time to remove most of the internal shielding, which made the ride more dangerous, but also more flexible. Most importantly, it allowed her to pull stunts like Orana. Reaching out to the firearm reaction powering the main thruster, she stoked it and accelerated. Dravota peeled to the side, looking for a way to weave around the stopped traffic they were rapidly approaching. In slowing down, he let Salatra race past him. That put her in second place with a half-mile to go. She could do this. She would beat Orana. Redirecting her prism, Salatra latched on to the electrum reaction powering the X-18's magnetic repulsors. She flared it, nearly doubling its consumption rate, and the hoverbike lifted several feet higher off the street. It was enough to clear the shorter cars, but she still had to weave around a few larger trucks she wouldn't be able to clear. This shoehorned her into a lane with a taxi, and her hoverbike took off the light-up sign on the roof of the cab in a shower of sparks. She could have used Aurum to give her extra height, but she only had 2 large crystals left and wanted to save them for a possible edge on Orana. Salatra increased her burn. The gauge warned her that at that rate she'd be out of fuel in about a mile. That was fine. She only needed enough for this stretch. With a thrill, Salatra realized she was gaining. Orana's flame trail had gone back to orange from blue. She must have assumed her lead was so strong that she could let off the throttle and coast to victory. Salatra's own throttle was already wide open, and she was using Prism to stoke the firearm beyond that. A needle reported the temperature climbing well into the zone where parts might start melting, but she was gaining. Orana dodged between 2 cars as she crossed the Proctor Lane intersection. Salatra blew through the same intersection 10 seconds later, the closest the gap had been since the race started. By the next intersection, that had dropped to 5 seconds. When they ran the red light at Duanwell Avenue, they were neck and neck. Not literally, though. Salatra had to lean a lot further forward on her X-18 than Orana did on her GZD. That purple machine was as much a living legend as Orana. The GZD wasn't the fastest model on the market, not even close. Yet, Orana made it work for her by making up the difference with Alchemancy. That was exactly why Salatra had to win. Being the better racer would feel good, but being the better Alchemancer, that would feel amazing. Orana glanced over, her hair just long enough to peek out around the edges of her helmet, like putting an eggshell over a poofy dandelion. The woman had at least 10 years on Salatra. She'd been the very reason Salatra had been drawn to racing in the first place. Several years of practice had left Silatra trailing her taillights. Today was the first time they'd been able to look each other eye to eye during a race, as equals. Now, Silatra just had to push a bit more, to push past equals, and beat the woman who had been her inspiration and now her rival. Arana grinned, prismatic glow of her eyes illuminating the fur of her orange and white cheeks. The flames of her main thruster shifted back towards blue as she caught up to and matched Silatra's speed. 3 intersections to go. They flew through the first together. Nearly all of Silatra's gauges were well into the red now. She could feel the Fyrum and Electrum reactions of the X-18 dwindling rapidly, but she clung to the hope there was enough to finish out the race. Silatra had pulled ahead by nearly the full length of her hoverbike as they weaved past a passenger van and a bus to blow through the second intersection. She could actually see the goal now. One more intersection, and then at the one beyond it, the finish line. Everything just had to last another 15 seconds. The Electrum reaction ran out. Her repulsor stopped, and the hoverbike slammed down to the street. Metal shrieked against metal, the X-18's undercarriage sending up showers of sparks as the rear thruster continued to propel it forwards. The friction cost her the lead, and Arana overtook her a moment later. Cursing her luck, Silatra reached for the Aurum crystals at her waist before smashing them against the side of the hoverbike. The reaction started immediately, threatening to rip the crystals right out of her fingers in a microburst of wind. Latching onto it, she redirected it under the bike, lifting it off the street by a few inches. It wasn't anywhere close to the 1.5 of comfortable height the Electrum repulsors could give, but it was enough to stop from scraping the ground and losing speed to excessive friction. Ahead of her, Arana was glancing back to watch, and her grin grew as Silatra salvaged most of her momentum and started catching up again. She could almost reach out and touch Arana's purple GZD as they reached the last remaining intersection before the finish. Then Silatra heard the horn. A glance to her right nearly blinded her. A large delivery truck was bearing down on them. The driver had had the green light. It would hit both of them in seconds. Thankfully, Silatra's adrenaline-fueled mind offered the obvious solution within a split second. If Arana used the rest of her prism to boost her Fyrum output, she'd go through fast enough to avoid getting hit. Because of her own hard burn to catch up, Silatra didn't have the Fyrum left to speed up, but she had a lot of Aurum energy left to pull on. She just had to direct it all to throw the hoverbike forward and out of the way. Latching on to what remained of the Aurum reaction, she willed it to lift the X-18. It did, but it was going to be too little, too late. She wouldn't clear the truck's path. Its own maneuvering thrusters were already trying to turn it and slow its momentum, but not nearly enough. That's when she noticed that Arana's thrusters were orange, not blue. In that moment, Silatra felt the Aurum push on her own bike nearly double in strength, and she was thrown high and clear of the truck. The truck clipped the back of Arana's hoverbike, and she was sent spinning. She left Silatra's field of view as the X-18 was carried across the finish line in the final throes of Aurum energy. The hoverbike smashed back down into the street, throwing up fresh sparks and ruining more of Silatra's custom paint job. Steering into the skid, Silatra cut the main thruster and applied her braking thrusters. She still traveled for almost 100 feet before she finally got the thing stopped. She was breathing hard, her pulse pounding a deafening rhythm in her ears, despite having burned through all her prism. Leaping from the hoverbike, Silatra took off running down the street on legs that felt as steady as gelatin stilts. Twice, they almost buckled entirely. All the thrill of having won the race was lost as she came up on what remained of Arana's GZD. The rear end of Arana's hoverbike was smashed in, purple paint scraped away to reveal gray and black internals. Arana herself wasn't on the hoverbike. She'd been thrown over a dozen feet away, where she'd struck a metal trash can hard enough to leave a body-sized dent. Blood was leaking from Arana's mouth as Silatra rolled her over. She'd lost several teeth, and the tip of her tongue dangled where she'd bitten through it. Arana groaned, a weak thing from the back of her throat. After a few shallow breaths, she said, "Thanks, Seed Mother. You're okay, Sparks." You should have sped up, idiot. Salatra would have slapped her role model across the muzzle if she hadn't been so injured there already. Instead, she fished a single, small Curum crystal from her pouch, one she kept on hand in case of road rash or similar levels of injuries. I knew you weren't going to make it, Arana said with a wry smile. Truthfully, I thought I was in the clear, so I gave everything to boost you. Shut up and suck on this. Salatra cracked the Curum crystal and stuffed it into Arana's mouth. Need prism, Arana said around the crystal. Yeah, I'm getting some. Now stop talking. I don't want you swallowing the crystal on accident. Salatra grabbed the last of her own prism canisters, punching a hole in the tip with her teeth. Then she stuck it partway into Arana's nose and held it there. A few moments later, Arana's eyes started to glow. Some more in my pouch, Arana said through a closed muzzle. Her hand reached down to a fanny pack that clung to her waist, and she fumbled for the zipper. Salatra opened it to find a small collection of colorful crystals that clinked against each other. There were 2 more Curum crystals in here. What hurts? She asked. Arana's body was covered in scrapes, with blood running from cuts in her arms and above her brows. Arana's tongue shifted the Curum crystal in her mouth so she could talk. Everything except my legs, which is probably a bad sign. You've got 2 crystals left. What would you like to stop hurting? Blood ran back to disappear into the hair hidden by Arana's helmet. The helmet itself was caved in and probably responsible for saving her life. Arana considered for a few long moments before deciding, my ribs. Grabbing a canister of prism from Arana's supplies, Salatra filled her system with it. Breaking a Curum crystal in each hand, she placed both palms on Arana's chest. She tried to be gentle, but Arana cried out in such pain she almost swallowed the Curum crystal, healing her mouth. Gritting her teeth, Salatra muttered a quick apology, then got to work. Minutes passed, and the truck driver never came back. The other racers didn't even show up. A couple cars passed, but no one stopped. Not until a car with flashing blue and red lights pulled up, and an enormous boulder of a Sneppard stepped out. Present day. Leo put down the Salatra report in his hands, leaning back in the oversized armchair Bradburn had left behind. His brain was exhausted from the past week of actually handling his new responsibilities as police chief of District 3. It was incredible just how many people stopped in his office on a daily basis. Every time he thought he was catching up, he only realized how far behind he still was. So when Tolson had come bursting into the room with a stack of partially burnt folders and a mischievous grin that looked like he'd discovered secrets only the Seed Mother knew, Leo had welcomed the distraction. Well? Tolson prompted from where he sat, on the visitor's side of the executive desk. Melissa sat beside him, leafing through a folder she'd selected from the pile. It explains why the chief knew to call on her as an expert witness. 25 years of prison time, but let out in 5 on good behavior. He also didn't include any of the alchemy use in the official report. That's all on notepad paper, added in after the fact. Why not report it? Did he think no one would believe him? Seems more likely he just didn't want people to know, Melissa commented, pulling out a page to examine. She flipped it over and read the other side before sticking it back in the folder. Her eyes were a little red at the edges. These were long days for all 3 of them, and Leo was pretty sure his office would forever smell like coffee. But bless these 2, they'd both stepped up to help him with his new workload, while maintaining their own. It wasn't uncommon to catch one of them dozing off in a chair with work in their lap and a pen in hand. Several papers had crossed his desk already to report this behavior, but Leo ignored them. His friends were sacrificing sleep and sanity to help him, and he wasn't about to throw either of them under the bus. He and Melissa were only just now beginning to heal after the last time he'd done that. That's what I'm saying! Tolson's chair tipped forward with his enthusiasm. This is Uncle Wilter, after all. I don't think there's a person in Cyphus that's ever met him and thought, yeah, this pro wrestler disguised as a snot seems a little too straightforward. I don't think I should believe him. Leo groaned, rubbing his temple with fingers sore from handling a pen all day. Too tired for double negatives, Tolson. All I'm saying is that if Uncle Wilter says something, he means it. Man has a lot of bones in his body, but not a one of them isn't direct and blunt. What did I just say about double negatives? What did I just say about double negatives? But it's not, Tolson said. It's just a single negative. It's already too many. Reaching for his thermos, Leo realized the Fyram element in the bottom was cold. It probably needed a new pellet. How many hours had it been since he'd gotten up to fill the thing? Time came to this office to die with the speed and certainty of a tower jumper without a chute. It went by too fast, and when it was over, it was over. The clock in the atrium had announced end of day shift long ago. The sun, streaming through Leo's cracked blinds, was deceptive. It was an off day, so it was still shining, even at 1900. His time in the hospital had cured him of some things, but his bitterness toward that angry yellow orb in the sky wasn't one of them. Tolson's got a point, Melissa noted, her eyes not leaving the pages in her hand. Chief was one to always speak his mind, and he's never been one to let anyone tell him no. Is he different around family? Tolson shook his head. Nah, he's just as prickly there. Either a thing is his way, or it doesn't happen at all. So, if he felt it needed to be included in the report, he probably would have actually written it into the report, even if he had orders to the contrary. Since he didn't include them, these seem more like personal notes, though they're kind of all over the place. Leo sighed, wishing for the 200th time that day that he could just go home, crawl in bed, and give his brain a rest. Of course, that would require both walking and laying down. Problem was, currently his body was still sore enough from his run-in with an ambulance for both activities to cause him pain. How could anyone hear about what happened to him last week and still believe hospitals weren't places of death? What do we know so far? Leo asked. Counting off on his fingers, he began answering his own question. We've got the remnants of rap sheets on 6 people Bradburn arrested while doing his time as a street snob. All of them Nulfs, all of them on charges of larceny, usually Grand Theft Auto. Most on resisting arrest, assault and battery, a couple of those being directed at officers. And thanks to Tolson's digging, we know that all 6 of them were incarcerated in the same cell block down in District 8's jailhouse. All seem to know each other, or at least of each other, though most of their crimes seem to happen independently. Bunch of solo artists. Only one still in prison. The others all got out early on good behavior and recommendations from the big man himself. Why that carried weight with the judge in District 8, I'm not sure. Is pardoning people one of the perks of my new position? Tolson shrugged. Why? Got someone in mind? Leo shook his head. No, it shouldn't be, Melissa chimed in again. As badly as she'd chased the position over the years, if anyone knew its limitations, it would be her. The recommendations he sent were requests to evaluate the inmates to see if they qualified for good behavior consideration. So it starts the process, but doesn't guarantee it. Now, if Bradburn and the judges were buddy-buddy, then that's probably where things become a different story. But across the 5 Nulfs that got let out, there were 3 different judges involved. So, either they're all corrupt, Bradburn had someone to pull the strings, or he's just that persuasive and personable that the judges went along with it. Tolson started laughing. Even Leo couldn't hide his smirk, though he suppressed her laugh. It would have hurt his ribs too much. Bradburn was an effective snop, but he was a brick wall of a man. Personable was the last word that came to mind when describing him. And persuasion was really more like intimidation when Bradburn was involved. So we've got 6 people, all documented thieves, all caught by Bradburn. 5 were then released in the coming years as Bradburn vouched for them. And he kept personal notes on their alchemical specialties and abilities. Beyond that, we've got names and aliases, work history, addresses, families, and he clearly documented all of it on his own time. Then, when it comes time to leave the force, he decides that's the best time to burn the evidence? Not take it with him and not use it later? Why? Was he just saving dirt on these people for a storm day? Did he call in our teacher Salatra, or I guess Naira now, as a favor? And of course, that was the question. Why? Why had Bradburn burned anything? It just made him look guilty, like he was trying to cover up some sort of conspiracy. And maybe there was a conspiracy. Each of the attacks on the 13 had been carried out by a Nulf who fit Salatra's description. One of the guards had even placed her at 2 of the crime scenes by name. He just happened to get hired on with a member of the 13 a few days before they got attacked, only to do the exact same thing a week later. Either he was in on the conspiracy, being paid to point the finger at Salatra, or just extremely unlucky. He made a mental note to seek out another interview with that guard. Leo, Tolson nearly wiggled in his chair as he said it. You remember that name, Salatra, right? Of course I do. It was the name the guard kit gave. Bryce. Yeah, that one. ID'd her as the killer. Sort of. Which would explain why his behavior got so goofy around her. Which is also why Uncle Wilter chewed me out when she left the hospital. He recognized the description and the name, and knew it was her. Leo frowned. Okay, but then why wait to tell us? He left the scene without saying anything, and then my car had to explode before he told anyone to even consider her a suspect. I get that we were constant thorns in his side, but still. Melissa looked up from her file. Covering for her, maybe? But worried we'd already made the connection somehow? So he burned the evidence, since he knew that he was on the way out anyway? Or he got what he needed from her, called in his favor for getting her out of jail early, then burned her record? Clean slate? Tolson's chair squeaked as he leaned back. It was just a little too small for him. Frowning, he shook his head. Uncle Wilter doesn't like letting useful things go. He's still got a phonograph back at his place. Swears that if he waits long enough, eventually it'll be worth millions. Used to joke that he'd get to use it to buy out one of the 13. But while it's an antique, it's only worth a few thousand Christum at best. Still won't sell it. Broke cousin Carson's finger when he tried to steal it. He grimaced, but managed to turn it into a half smile. Point is, Uncle's not the type to let anything go. Leo's head was spinning. There was a lot of new information to take in, and it was mixing with all the police chief things he'd spent the last week learning. Tired as he was, he might need to just sleep in the office tonight. At least there was a couch in the corner, and it already smelled like cigar smoke. Necrol wouldn't be too noticeable. Thinking about it triggered the itch, and his fingers started tapping the desk. He'd breathed in a lot of Necrol at the hospital. Ever opportunistic, the doctors had offered to run some kind of scan on his lungs. Said they could take safe pictures with their X-rays. Everyone knew that anima poisoned people who used X-rays. Probably some sort of punishment on the world for relying too much on technology. Really, the doctors just wanted more of his money to poke him in the ribs and say, well, you've been a chain smoker for 10 years, so your lungs are screwed and so are you. That'll be 1,500 Christum. What a waste. Of course he turned it down. He could already feel how messed up his lungs were. His breaths were a little shallower these days, and it wasn't just because of the pain of a few broken ribs. You okay, dude? It was Tolson asking. Go figure. Forcing a smile for his friend's sake, Leo nodded. Yeah, just tired and sore. A lot on my mind. Want to talk about it? No, not really, but thanks for... Melissa spoke this time, cutting him off. Leo, not talking about your trauma is exactly what caused us so many problems last time. He met her gaze, expecting to see frustration. There was a little, but there was far more concern. Not pity, thankfully, just concern. He really didn't want to talk about it. Not now, not ever. But she was right. He wasn't going to put them through that sort of treatment again, just so he could sulk and bewail how much anima enjoyed filling his life with torment after torment. Where should he even start, though? He drew in a long breath until pain shot through his core, and he had to stop to avoid upsetting his ribs. Slowly, he let the breath back out until the pain abated. It didn't make forming words easier, but he did force a few out. The past crawled out of the morgue down there. At the hospital? Melissa asked. Tolson leaned in. Like zombies? This earned him a smack from Melissa, and he gave an exaggerated ow! Yeah, at the hospital. And more ghosts than zombies. There was a kit down there. Whole bunch of Nolfs robbing the place. But there was one kit in particular. I didn't recognize him at first. I definitely should have. But I was too upset at being in the hospital that I wasn't thinking straight. And he's not the only one I should have remembered. Leo's finger tapping had increased its speed. Now that Necrol was forever tied in his mind to his experiences in that hospital basement, and through that to his memories of the worst night of his life, it lost most of its appeal. It only held an empty warmth for him, a false embrace that would just keep him a rotting corpse in the corner. Didn't fix the itch, though. The itch still wanted to be satisfied, even if Leo knew that giving in wouldn't provide satisfaction that could last. Yet again, he was trying to quit Necrol, but this time it had gotten tangled up with something he hated more than the sun, confronting himself. Distraction helped the itch, at least temporarily. So he grabbed the Cilatra folder in front of him and opened it. There wasn't a lot in here. She'd lived a fairly straightforward life. Brought in as a rescue from outside the bulb, grew up in an orphanage, then transitioned to life on the streets by teendom. Disappeared for a while, returned to make a living by stealing, then by illegal street racing with stolen hoverbikes. 5 years in prison, used free time there to study. Got out of prison, changed her name, and pursued a career in education favoring science and alchemy. Married a Nolf musician, and... Leo flipped to the page he wanted. There was a photo and a simple family tree. Her husband had been born in the bulb, so his went back all the way to the great-grandparent level. But her line started with her. Thanks to Leo, it was one step closer to ending with her, too. His hand was shaking now. The photo wasn't the one that had run in the newspapers. It was a family photo from a baseball game. Naira, her husband, and her 2 boys. Tolson and Melissa both leaned in. Wow, Tolson noted. She hasn't aged a day. She's real pretty, don't you think? Melissa nodded absently. She does a good job of taking care of herself. Then her eyes widened as she read the names on the page. She'd figured out what Leo needed to say, though she still didn't have all the connections. Leo's lips felt dry, like he hadn't had water since that day in the rain. He placed a quivering finger onto Zale's picture. This is the one who attacked me in the hospital. Melissa frowned, then her expression melted, and she looked like someone had just slapped her. Now she'd drawn the connection. Well, that's quite the coincidence, Tolson mused. He had no idea. Leo's finger moved across to rest on Rendell's picture. It was almost relieving to hide those accusing eyes. This is... he started, but the words caught in his throat. He tried to swallow to clear it, but there was nothing there. Things were tightening all over his body, and his hand trembled even more. Tolson looked up expectantly, but patiently. Melissa nudged him. Read the name. He did. Then he frowned. This is Rendell, Leo forced out, each word stealing far too much breath from him. He's the kit The words died there again. Despite Leo's failing communication skills, Tolson finally realized. His own eyes went wide, and Leo spotted some sympathy tears at the corners. Leo, I'm so sorry. Leo shook his head. He didn't want sympathy. He hated that any time he thought about this, he was reduced to a whimpering Mueller. I need to say it. Give me a minute, and let me say it. Reaching over the desk, Tolson took one of Leo's hands and gave it a squeeze. After a few seconds, Melissa did the same, only without the squeeze. They sat like that for a long moment, while Leo worked to steady his breathing. It's not like the words he needed to say were complicated. That still didn't make them easy to say. Despite his own frustrations with himself, his tail had gone completely limp. Scraping his tongue across his lips, he took in a sharp breath through his nose and swallowed hard. And Doll is the kit I shot. He's dead. Because of me. He could smell the smoke from his 38 mingling with the humid air. Could see the beads scattering as they hit the ground. The last moment the eyes met his own, fractal glow, brilliant in the moonlight, before the head snapped back and the eyes went dull forever. The canister of fractal clutched in silvery fingers, a gift meant for him. Silence stretched between the three of them. Leo felt both a relief and an emptiness at admitting this. It was like the exhaustion that comes when you finally set down a heavy load you've been carrying for hours. In this case, years. He no longer wanted to get up and keep moving. He just wanted to lay there and be tired. But he couldn't. He had a responsibility to keep moving. He owed it to the kit and his family. It wasn't... Words were only escaping him in broken pairs and tiny groups, like they had the buddy system before leaving his mouth so they wouldn't get lost. He would have wiped at an eye, but both of his friends were still holding his hands. Would they still be holding them when he was done talking? It wasn't like the report. The words clawed their way along Leo's throat, like they were fighting to stay inside so he couldn't drag them out into the light of day. They were his words, after all. Made sense they'd hate the sun as much as he did. It wasn't like the report, he repeated, and the words came a bit easier this time. Leo caught how both of his friends' gazes softened, and he drove his own gaze down to his desk. They'd both been so worried about him after it happened. He knew they'd both read the reports. He'd filed one, and so had Chief Bradburn. Bradburn had insisted that the reports agree. After all, we look out for each other, Officer Parsons. And, you're thinking about it too much, Officer Parsons. And, throwing away your career won't bring you peace of mind, Officer Parsons. Leo had been floundering too much in those days, that Bradburn's words had felt like a life raft, one he'd clung to until he'd learned the truth. The truth had broken him. The report outlined the events clearly. A rally had turned violent. There were lots of officers on scene, and Bradburn had insisted that the event get shut down before more people got hurt. Some of the rally-goers were on Fractal, which made them elevated threats. Leo wasn't the only one who pulled the trigger that night, and like the others, his actions were spun as self-defense. What a joke. Panic had been his motivation. Maybe conditioning, but mostly panic. But the truth became whatever the report said, and the report said the kit had brandished a weapon. Bradburn had provided a witness statement to this effect, and who in their right minds would question Chief Bradburn on anything? The kit didn't have a weapon. Leo had checked him thoroughly afterwards. He was in such a state of numbing shock at the time that all he could remember was searching desperately for a weapon and coming up empty. The whole time, those dull eyes watching him and laughing because they knew he wouldn't find anything. Neither Detective Melissa operate by the books and trust the reports McKinley, or Officer Tolson, Leo can do no wrong, Gray, said anything. They had as much of an interest in the truth as Leo, so they were giving him time to talk. No knife, gun, nothing dangerous. Chief always said that Fractal took people away, left thoughtless, impulsive husks behind. Leo bit his lip and tasted blood. Shaking his head, he had to clear his throat to keep going. But the kid was there that night. Not just physically. When a single trickle leaves a body of water, it can be hard to convince more to follow after it. What guarantee does the rest of the water have that this trickle has found the optimal path? And yet, this was the right path. More water was joining the flow. The words brought pain and terror and all the things Leo didn't want anyone else to see about himself. But he'd started to talk, and now he couldn't stop. He was physically there, yes, but his eyes, see, Mother, his eyes. Some part of me knew. The part of me that was afraid of tragedies. It's the part that screamed until I pulled the trigger. Like some sort of anima-born, self-fulfilling prophecy. I saw the light there. Not the fractal light, but the light of life behind that. He was there. I still shot him. And all he wanted was for me to see. He told me that he could show me, but I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to the Bradburns and the Glentleys in my head. I saw the reflection of metal, and all I could think of was the knife that ended Glently's life. Some part of me registered that it wasn't a knife, but I didn't recognize it at first. I should have waited. Last time I waited, someone died, but damn it, take me, I should have waited. The trickle from his eyes was becoming a stream, forging a path down the banks of his cheeks. Tolson squeezed his hand harder. The room fell silent, save for Leo's own hitching breaths. He waited for their reactions, expecting Tolson to tell him that he was too cool to let this get him down, that he shouldn't worry about it because he couldn't have known and did the best with the information he had. Or Melissa to chew him out for willingly submitting a falsified report and allowing the chief to cover for him, for throwing her under the bus when she'd come close to finding the truth. They should chew him out. Seed Mother knew he deserved it. But they didn't. His fears were, as always, unwarranted. His friends were better people than he was. Eventually, Tolson got up from his seat and walked around to wrap Leo in a hug. Melissa stayed seated, but she never let go of Leo's hand. It was the part of the job no one ever talked about. The screw-ups, the bad calls, the potential for destruction that any single moment held. It was the thing that the good ones dreaded. Those mistakes whose cost was paid at the expense of the innocent. And they'd experienced it before. Arrest the wrong person, stick them in jail for a time, and find out later that you got it wrong. Something like that wasn't fully reversible, but at least it wasn't final. Not like this, where a decision made in a split second turned a home into the place where ghosts kept you from sleeping without tears. Melissa and Tolson hadn't experienced this part of the job yet, but Leo knew they dreaded it. Fanina, his own reaction to it, probably fueled their dread. But what could they do? What could any of them do? If we can't trust you to do the right thing, who can we trust? That was just it. Sulking and moping didn't help anyone. Leo, Melissa, Tolson, all three of them had joined the police for one prevailing reason: to help people, to protect, and to serve. It was terrifying to realize that every moment meant you were a fur's breadth from making a bad call and getting someone killed. But even so, someone had to do it. More importantly, someone had to do it right. Bringing his free hand up, Leo wiped at his nose, then stroked the matted fur under his eyes. Thank you, guys. Tolson replied, but didn't release the hug. Of course, Chief. Hey, Melissa said, squeezing his hand until he finally looked up to meet her gaze. Come to us sooner next time. You shouldn't have to bear these things alone. I know you think you do, and that you think you're protecting us. But I don't give a dross about being protected. So tell us next time, okay? Her eyes were glistening at the corners. She wasn't the mess that he was. She even gave him a smile, the most genuine one he'd seen from her in years. Seed Mother. He didn't deserve either of his friends, but he was thankful to have them. Leo nodded. Yeah, I'll do that. It took a few minutes for all of them to recover. Eventually, Tolson returned to his chair. Melissa removed her hand, and though Leo didn't want to let go, he knew better than to grab for it. Mostly composed by now, Leo turned his attention back to the photo still in front of him. He tapped it again, focusing on the grinning boy in a striped uniform and sporting a notch in his left ear. After clearing his throat for real, he picked up again. Like I said, I ran into him in the hospital basement, and we recognized each other after a bit. Hadn't seen each other since the funeral for his brother. So 3 years. He wanted to kill me once he figured it out. Leo intentionally left out that a very real part of him had wanted to let Tazale kill him as some sort of long overdue justice. Tolson and Melissa didn't need to hear that, not after working so hard to encourage him. He's like his mother, at least if we believe Bradburn's notes on her, Leo continued. Uses alchemy as a weapon. Fire, lightning, the whole 9 yards. Tolson's eyes lit up. He fought you with magic? Despite feeling too drained for mirth, Leo smirked. Yes, Tolson, he fought me with magic. And you're not singed or anything? I didn't say he was good at it, just that he used it. I took a couple electrified punches to the gut, but the ambulance messed me up more than anything. If he wanted to kill you, why didn't he? Melissa asked. He tried. Opening his desk drawer, Leo pulled out his Edwest 38 and laid it on the desk. Melissa's eyes widened, and Tolson looked like he'd just been shown some magical sword from a story. The slide was still jammed back, one round ready to load into the chamber. It was obvious the slide would never move forward again. The grip had indentations now, and looked a bit like squeezed dough, despite still being firm and metallic. Because of the grip deformities, the magazine was stuck inside, and had defied all of Leo's best efforts to free it. Most telling, the barrel of the gun had sealed shut, as if it had melted in on itself, and was a major contributing reason why the slide no longer worked. I brought it out during the fight, and fired exactly 1 round. Broken overhead pipe as a distraction. Since it's a hospital, I don't feel guilty. They've got more than enough of my money to pay for repairs. Neither Tolson or Melissa laughed. They just continued to stare at Leo's broken gun. Fits better than ever, Leo said with a half-hearted laugh. Picking up the gun, he showed them that the deformities in his gun did make it sit perfectly in his palm and fingers. But definitely broken. Which is a good thing, because he tried to shoot me point blank. Twice. What does it mean? Tolson whispered. I have no idea, Leo admitted. I assume that he was angry enough and using enough fire magic earlier that he melted my gun when he tried to use it. Tolson seemed so caught up in the idea that he nodded absently, but Melissa frowned. If he melted the gun, wouldn't that make it fit his hand, not yours? That had been the question that had plagued Leo for the last week. Not having a good answer, he shrugged. Yeah, it's not a theory that holds much water, but I don't have a better theory at the moment. So you did it, Tolson said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. He was giving Leo those puppy dog hero worship eyes again. Leo scoffed. I don't know dross about alchemy. Naira explained a few basics, but nothing that would let me do anything like this. Besides, it doesn't match the flashiness of the fire and lightning and air stuff I've come to expect after my run-in with her kit. If I did this, I don't have the first clue as to how, or even why. Tolson launched into several different theories, each one more absurd than the last. Leo dismissed them each in turn, and Tolson's excited outburst turned into the mutterings of a madman. Eventually, the excitement tapered off, Leo settling back in his chair while Tolson turned the useless melted lump of metal over and over in his hands. "Well, Chief," Melissa said with extra emphasis that was surprisingly good-natured, despite how bitter the word probably tasted to her. "What now?" "That's a really good question. One I'm not sure I'm awake enough to have a good answer for." "I know what'll wake you up," Tolson blurted. Leo and Melissa both turned to him with dreary, skeptical looks. Tolson beamed with enviably renewed energy. "Benji's!"